Yes, today we would like to ask you who's Busshi. So my documentary is about the Buddhist sculptors of Japan, and in Japanese, those people are called Busshi. But I want to know from an art historian point of view who Busshi is and who was Busshi. Please tell us.
Okay, essentially, Busshi is the Japanese pronunciation of a Chinese term, which literally translated means Buddha teacher. But that's not necessarily how it's commonly translated. It's commonly translated as someone who makes Buddhist statuary. And the term first appeared in Japan in 623 of the Common Era. And we know this because there's a statue at Horyuji in Nara, which is one of Japan's oldest temples. There's a statue there, and in the halo of the statue is carved Tori Bushi, which this was the name of the man who carved or who made this statue was Tori, and then he signed his name Busshi, Buddha teacher. And ever since then, the term has been used for people who make Buddhist statuary. Okay. Now, it can also be used for people who paint Buddhist paintings, or it can be used for any number of artistic specialties, divisions of labor, people who work with jewelry in Buddhism, people who work with painting the statues, people who work with wood. They all are called Busshi. Okay. They all can be called Busshi. Now, what happens now is that around the 7th century, government-sponsored workshops were established in Japan to produce Buddhist statues for the imperial court and the nobility. And this is where all the Busshi worked. And inside of these workshops, there was always the master Busshi, the headmaster, and then there were always the apprentice and the assistant Busshi, okay? I think your film, Carving the Divine, really shows us with the Grand Master and then his student, who then has all these younger apprentices that he's teaching. And so the Grand Master Busshi is called the Dai Busshi, the big guy, right? And the apprentices and the assistant Busshi are called the Sho Busshi, or the underlings. So Dai Busshi, Sho Busshi. Then it's also interesting to note that around the end of the 8th century, the government stopped its state-sponsored workshops. And all of the Busshi then had to leave and find new work. And so many of them found new work by working for temple workshops, or they opened up their own independent workshops. Now, during this time was also very interesting. The Dai Busshi, the headmaster, the guy on the top, the best maker of statues, was considered a monk. And he was also given the rank of high priest. Now, he did not perform or carry out religious rituals. This was just an honorific title given to carvers of Buddhist statuary in medieval Japan to show their very high status in society. The carving people had a very high status in society. But then in the Muromachi period, around the 15th century, they ended this system of giving special status to the Busshi. And so the Busshi then became just general artisans. They were classified as just general artisans. They lost their special social status. And then by the Meiji period, the whole system of the Dai Busshi and the Sho Busshi, the system of the headmaster and all the apprentices and assistants, that was abandoned as well. So we have a situation today which you probably know more than I do, that the Busshi today are probably independent artisans who need to go out and find temples and people they do repairs for the temples, or they make a new statue for the temple, or they're making statues for I don't know who, but it must be a very tough life because they've lost their official status. They no longer have these state-sponsored workshops. And the temples, I'm not sure how much work they can get from the temples. And the other big question I have to you is, I kind of worry about this, is these days, it's happening. 3D printing has come along. And some of the temples have now done the 3D laser imaging of their treasures, their Buddhist treasures. And they're making replicas of their treasures. And then these replicas are being sent, to museums outside of Japan or in Japan, or they're being sold. And so if 3D printing technology, which can make stuff in wood, stone, plastic resin, many other materials, if 3D imaging can produce, and 3D printing can produce a perfect replica of ancient treasures, what's going to happen to our real human artisans who make the statues?
That's a very scary thought. You're right about that. The only thing that I would say is, Busshi statues that Busshi make in Japan, they don't use sandpaper. They only use chisels to make these statues. It's very time consuming, and it takes a lot of skills and hours and all this. I don't know how much 3D printer can do that, but possibly they could be at that level. So I have no idea. But right now, it's hard for me to imagine that they can do something like Busshi does. But at the same time, also, I was told by people that, ancient statues, Japanese ancient statues are more than just the statues. They have some feelings inside. You can feel it when they see them, when people see them. So these kind of feelings, I don't know if a 3D printer can reproduce that as well. That's I would like to say about that.
Well, essentially I agree with what you said. These statues are not dead. They're living icons. These ancient treasures, they're living icons. And in many cases, the temple authorities will not allow for 3D printing or 3D lasering. So those are safe. Smaller temples, however, they think their treasures are slowly deteriorating, falling apart. They're more willing to use the 3D than some of the national treasures of Japan. Mm-hmm. And so most temples won't allow it, mm-hmm. I'm sure. Even some of those temples have never allowed us to take x-rays to find out if there's something inside of the statues, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of the treasures in Japan, mm-hmm. we know, have scrolls hidden inside. They have smaller statues hidden inside. They have who commissioned the statues and all these different kinds of offerings inside the statue. Mm-hmm. And we already know this through CT scanning and X-ray, but for many of the great treasures in Japan, the temple authorities refuse to allow us to examine the statues in this way. Mm-hmm. So those statues will never be 3D printed. Mm-hmm. Sure. So.